She was the flagship of the Italian Navy. She never saw action and remained a lot of her life in port, until she was eventually sunk by 2 German high-tech bombs. This is the Battleship Roma.
Yo, what's up homies, this is the Gangsta with a brand new video, and today is the next issue in the Ships of War collection. Yes, this is issue 24, the Italian battleship Roma, or Super Dreadnought. This is one of my favourite ships actually. She didn't unfortunately make the top 5 list of ships from World War II because she was only just beaten by Petropavlovsk, but Roma was going to be one. So yes, anyway, this was the leading ship, this was a flagship, this was essentially the Italians' version of the Bismarck, and the Italians' version of the King George V or HMS, as you like to put it. And this was really what Italy had during World War II. It was the flagship of Italy. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I really love the detail they've done on her. You see, at the bow she has the, obviously the camouflage, the identification. The bow was painted, the bow of Italian battleships were painted, and the stern sometimes were painted red and white, and that was to stop the Italian planes from bombing their own ships. And I just love the detail that they've done on the actual turrets. You can see like the protection there that they had on top of the turrets to protect them against bombs, and it was really ingenious the way that they actually protected their turrets to stop them from being knocked out. And the camouflage they've done on her is fantastic as well. You can see here. And it's just a really fantastic model. They've done a really good job. They usually do terrible jobs with the paintwork, but they've done a really good job with her. There are a few, yes, you know, but obviously it's mass produced. What do you expect, really? But yeah, so this is the model. She had 15-inch guns, 9 in total, and she was capable of, correct me if I'm wrong, but she was apparently capable of travelling up to 45.6 knots. And I don't know a single battleship which can travel up to that speed. Like, usually they travel up to 30 if they're good, but this thing was capable of traveling up to 45, which is insane. Here's a nice picture of her at the front. Yeah. So anyway, obviously front page we got a picture of her, and next issue we got the USS Wisconsin, the last Iowa-class battleship to be built. So obviously this explains about her being built and blah blah blah, and that she was built, these class of ships were built to combat the Dunkirk class, and so yeah, really, and obviously it just really explains about her, and she was launched in 1940, but she was more powerful than the Dunkirk class and the Richelieu. If you beg to differ, then tell me. But yeah, and obviously this talks about her and her construction. Here's obviously a ceremony at the stern of her, just as she was finished. Here's her on her sea trials, I believe, or gunnery trials, whatever, firing her guns. Quite impressive, aren't they? And yeah, and this is her finished, essentially, with a camouflage. And if you notice that her turret actually is raised, the reason as to this was because the stern was actually lowered the deck so that they could launch aircraft better, because a lot of the ships, like the Missouri, etc., etc., the Missouri and the Eisenhower, those ships, when they fired or came under attack, they can launch their planes, but she was designed to do that. She had a hangar built in there, and that was designed to keep the aircraft stored safe, so basically they could get them out, so when the guns fired, they didn't get affected. And so really what happened with Roma was that she was just essentially just there. She never really did anything as such. She was just sort of the flagship, and she never really actually engaged in battle or anything. Here's a picture of her. And she was a very nice ship, she really was. And here's a reconnaissance seaplane that she had, been launched from the stern. But yeah. And she was constantly attacked. She was attacked, obviously, with the Italian version of Pearl Harbor, when the British, we sent a bunch of swordfish to go and engage the Italian Navy, and we sort of sunk them, we sort of didn't. They repaired, but it did put Italy out of action with Navy-wise. and she was targeted when America joined the war by B-17s, but she never really took that much damage. So specifications about her: she had an overall length of 240 meters. She was driven by engines, and she was capable of going up to... Alright, now this is confusing. I think it might be in a misprint, because it's 30 knots it says there, so I'm not really sure. But it says 45 for some odd reason. Anyway, and she had the primary armament of 15-inch guns, and they had the roof armor, obviously upgrade, so that obviously bombs couldn't penetrate them and, you know, stop them from firing. And she had 6-inch secondaries located here. These are not these are A guns, but secondary wise she didn't have a lot. And the armor belt was actually quite good on her. It was actually very good. But the problem was that it was very good with stuff sort of quite close to the surface, but something that was below, that was it, she was screwed, because they actually didn't go down that far. The armor belt could either be thicker or lower down, so they chose thicker to make it very... So essentially on the top she's very armoured here, but below not so much. Anyway, and yes, obviously because of the turrets being horribly made, they had a horrible dispersion, so basically they couldn't hit anything. They'd have to like just spray the entire ocean, which obviously battleship guns are not capable of. They have to be like sniper rifles, they have to hit the target, obviously. But obviously Italy, you know, just decided to, I don't know, make them that way. And so no actually Italian battleships actually hit any other ships during World War II. And this was her just before she set off. Obviously we can see here, we can see the camouflage that she had at the front, the actual identification. And so yeah, and obviously this was right when Mussolini was thrown out of Italy, as we know. And obviously the people rose up against him, killed him, you know, etc, etc. And really they sort of accepted the Allies. But the Italian Navy had to fill their part of the deal, you see, because they had two options, the Admiral. He could either have went to go and engage the British invasion fleet with the Italian Navy. However, it would be suicide, because the Italian Navy was in fact thrown out, they were outnumbered 2-1, because the British had their fleet there and so did the Americans. Or option 2, they could go to the Allies and go and make peace, and so they obviously option 2. But there's a slight problem. Germany didn't want that to happen, and the order was given that if the Italian Navy was to attempt to surrender and go to Allied port, they have to stop the Navy, they have to sink the ships. And so what happened was that obviously Admiral Carlo Bermangi, sorry if I can't pronounce it right, obviously he went aboard and he made the decision to in fact go and surrender. And here he is there, Admiral and Captain. But yeah, and so obviously the decision was made to essentially go there. So obviously they got the Vittorio, the Veneto, and Roma, and all three of them decided to go and head to Allied port. La Spezia, they were going to go to Malta, which was Britain, essentially. And then the Germans found out. And what they did was that they sent a reconnaissance aircraft, and they saw the ship, and they sent back and they said they're going to make for Allies, they're going to attempt to surrender. So what happened was that the Germans basically went, right, we're having none of that. They got their bombers with this new bomb. And this thing is a killer. Honest to God, it is a killer. The first ever, correct me if I'm wrong, remote-controlled bomb. Yes, I know there was experimental ones and during the war, but this was essentially, this thing worked. It was essentially similar to the tall boy bomb, like a dart bomb, but it was remote controlled. It was a lot smaller than the tall boy. And what this bomb had was that it had a flare. And the operator, is that he would have to look at the bomb and he would guide it left, right, up, down. Essentially, it would constantly be going down, but he could move it, essentially. And so what happened was that Roma was hit by one of these bombs called the Fritz bomb. That's what it was famous for, the X-radio controlled bomb. And Roma was hit essentially here, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, it might be on the other side. Oh. And what happened was that obviously this caused a list and explosion. The bomb penetrated deep into the ship, and in fact went straight through beneath and exploded beneath in the water. So obviously she had an initial list at first, and then a second one came. Now the bombers, they were too high, they couldn't be shot down, and so obviously they said that they essentially looked like this. They looked like toy tubs in the bathtub. So what they did was that they then again, down they went, boom boom, and what happened was that the second one hit in the most awkward position you could possibly imagine. Let me just move my finger there. Right there, in between the turret and the superstructure. Honest to God, it hit there. I don't know how, but the Germans have this thing for being really lucky. I thought it was originally the funnel, but nope, turns out it was actually the turret. And what happened was that it actually caused the front turret here to blow up. This entire, it somehow got, and similar to HMS Hood, it penetrated and it got the 15-inch shells that was on board her. And this entire turret was engulfed in flames and blew off. And the explosion killed everyone on the bridge instantaneously. Everyone on the bridge died. That was it. Just dead. And obviously, as we can see from the pictures here, here she is when the second bomb hit, and this caused the front turret. As we can see, the 15-inch has exploded, the 15-inch shells, and we've got this massive, in fact, explosion. And this was her after the turret blown off. As we can see here, look at that, you can make out the circle there. There's no turret. The front turret's there, the aft turret's there, but not to that turret. And obviously what happened was that, all mass panic. And a lot of Italians died, but the reason why they died, 1,393 men died, was due to the fact that they actually helped each other. They tried to help each other off the ship. A lot of them on the surface, on the decks, tried to get inside and get them out, and they just couldn't. And so obviously the ship capsized. She split in two, essentially because she blew up, and she is now at the bottom of the ocean. In 2012, she was actually found quite recently. Well, I don't know, but I tried finding it. Well, recently to me, because obviously, that was when I was interested in it before 2012. And yeah. And now she's preserved as a war grave. But the wreck's in two halves. I believe that she is upright. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. It's very hard to find out because no one actually reports much about shipwrecks. They just say, oh yeah, they're blown up to pieces. And then that's it. But yeah. And so really, 15 months, that's all she had. And she only, she just went from port to port, really. And it was quite sad, really. And she never actually went into action with a ship. The only guns which have been fired were the anti-aircraft guns, actually. Those were the only guns which were fired. And they tried their best to protect her from those bombers, but they just couldn't. So yes, next issue we have is the USS Wisconsin, the Iowa-class battleship. This is the last of the Iowa-class battleships, I believe. Not unless America's secretly producing more, which I highly doubt. But yes, and obviously she followed very similar to her sisters, Iowa and Missouri, obviously serving in World War II and Korea and the Gulf War. Yes, and obviously to bombard targets, because we both got dragged into a war which we shouldn't have. Thank you very much, Tony Blair and George Bush. But anyway, and that ends this issue here. So anyway, this has been 24 of the Ships of War collection, the Battleship Roma. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. If you have any questions about stuff, then go ahead and ask me. I don't know, I never really say that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And as always, peace out, my homies.